Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the Kurds and their situation and the relationship between the Kurds and Israel. Israel was the only vocal Western country to step forward and support the Kurds during their referendum for independence on September 25th. The only Western voice. And now Israel is diplomatically engaging with many Western countries in an effort to convince them to step forward and defend the Kurds who, since the referendum, have become the target of vicious and frequent attacks by Iraqi and Turkish forces. Recently, Iraq wrestled the strategic oil-rich region of Kirkuk from the Kurds. That is a major blow on two fronts. It diminishes territory under Kurdish domain, and it hits the Kurds significantly in their pocketbook. The entire operation seems to have been planned by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It looks like more than Kirkuk fell. There are reports that the Kurdish regional government, which was known as the KRG, is now, in the aftermath, a shadow of its former self. Iraq's leadership has made their point of view very clear, and they've even drawn a parallel with Israel. Just days before the election, Iraqi leadership publicly and insistently declared they will not allow the establishment of a Kurdish state. Iraq's disfavor with the Kurds is no secret. The office of Iraqi Vice President Nouri al-Maliki released a statement divulging the substance of his meeting with U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Douglas Silliman, when convened to discuss the very Kurdish situation. Al-Maliki's message was as threatening as it was clear. Quote, "We will not allow the creation of a second Israel in the north of Iraq," unquote. While the parallel might not be obvious to all, it is glaringly obvious to those in the region. Iraq and Turkey and Syria and Lebanon and all the others all see the Kurds as another Israel because in their eyes, the Kurds, like Israel, are outsiders. They do not belong. They are interlopers. History is irrelevant. It doesn't matter how long and how many centuries the Kurds have been there. They do not belong. The reason Israel is defending the Kurds, on the other hand, should be obvious to all. Israel is giving moral support to the Kurds. The Kurds are about to be massacred. Without help, they will be wiped out. They cannot run. They cannot assimilate. They are different, and no one wants them. So yes, in many ways, the Kurds are very similar to Jews because they know the fate that awaits them, because they understand the outcome if they lose. The Kurds will fight to the death. They will fight to defend their homes and protect their families from being defiled, tortured, and brutalized and murdered, often under the guise of inhumane entertainment by their enemies. There is no more powerful motivation for Kurdish fighters than the reality that awaits them. For decades, there has been a strong interaction and binding ties between Israel and the Kurds. Most of those ties were clandestine in nature. Israel did not advertise that they helped train the Kurds and taught them strategies of self-defense. Neither did the Kurds. Israel helped the Kurds in business and in trade, and Israel bought their oil. Israel came through for the Kurds. The United States did not. The United States engaged with the Kurds by making promises and then pulling back. Only now, over the past few months, has the United States been able to rebuild a sense of trust with the Kurds. That's the way it should be. The Kurds are one of the most pro-Western groups in the region. They are the sworn enemy of radical Islam. And that alone makes them a perfect partner for Israel and for the United States. While Israel has known it for a long time, the United States is only now buying into that famous line from Machiavelli's The Prince, which goes something like this: "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." The fact that Kurds are so despised by Iran and ISIS and Al-Qaeda makes them Israel's friend and the United States' friend. Little else really matters. There's one more essential reason for Israeli support of the Kurds. Moral, political, diplomatic altruism aside, this reason eclipses all others. It is a matter of national significance. It is a matter of national security. The Kurds are a strategic asset for Israel. They are closely situated in a region inhabited by Israel's most dangerous enemies. Having assets embedded among the Kurds, using their knowledge of the area, language skills, is of great benefit for Israel. The safety and security of the Kurds has a direct impact on the safety of Israel. Maybe the Kurdish referendum really was a mistake. The United States and the United Nations certainly thought it was. But the Kurds voted 92% in favor of independence. The 8% who voted against independence were Sunnis and Shiites, minorities living in the region who had the right to vote, but who have obviously and absolutely no allegiance to the Kurds. Here's a warning. If the international community does not step in and put a stop to Iran, Iraq, and Turkey's nefarious intentions, there is very strong possibilities that an organized, brutal massacre of the Kurds will take place in the region. I've also been thinking a lot about how the sands are shifting in the Middle East. Raqqa has fallen. Raqqa, the Syrian city ISIS claimed as their capital, no longer holds that distinction. Clearly, Raqqa is a gargantuan win for the West, a monumental loss for ISIS. The victory over ISIS in Raqqa was crushing. Raqqa, like the city of Mosul, which fell several months ago, was not just a city by name, it was a symbol. ISIS propaganda used Raqqa as their example of the good life, a place where Islamic statehood could not only work but thrive. In the world, often controlled by social media, Raqqa and Mosul were proof positive that the Islamic world, that the West was evil and Islam was good. Raqqa and Mosul were powerful magnets drawing young people to join ISIS. But revelers beware. The fall of Raqqa does not equate with the death of ISIS. ISIS fighters have been relocating for months. Many have already relocated to Yemen and Libya. We do not hear much about the fighting and the jockeying for position in those countries, not because it isn't happening, but only because the conflicts tearing Libya and Yemen apart are less pressing for the Western world. Out of sight, out of mind. They figure less prominently on our radar, not theirs. The dissolving of ISIS in Syria does not signal an end to Islamic extremism in Syria either. It is merely a shift in dynamics. As ISIS is moving out of position, Iran and Hezbollah are moving into positions that fill the void. As the ground settles, Israel wants to be certain that their safety is not compromised. If Iran establishes a forward position on Israel's Syrian border, Iran would have the potential to create a situation in which every single Israeli citizen would be in range of Iranian weapons every hour and every minute of every day. That's not wild speculation. It is a reliable probability, and it is a situation which Israel deems totally intolerable. If Russia does not come through for them and use their leverage to control Iran and Syria and Lebanon, and also Hezbollah in Lebanon, ensuring that they are not capable of further jeopardizing Israel's safety, Israel will do it on her own. If they must, Israel will take direct steps to prevent Iran from endangering its citizens and security. And they will not do it through gentle persuasion and diplomatic channels. Most reports indicate that the Russians have been swayed to Israel's point of view and agree with Israel that Iran cannot have access to Syria and Lebanon, at least not to the areas close to Israel's borders. In early discussions with Russia, Israel demanded that there be no Iranian Hezbollah presence at all, but then recalibrated and suggested a 25-mile or 40-kilometer buffer zone. Russia, in principle, accepted the pitch, but with a slight set of modifications. They want 5 to 10 miles of buffer. This dialogue is ongoing, but the issues are now practical, not theoretical. Whatever the end result is for Iran vis-a-vis this go-around with Israel, they are not spending too much time fretting and planning on it. The Iranians have greater plans and aspirations. Germany, let's say, for instance, just released a report claiming that Iran is bent on acquiring nuclear weapons. Now remember something. This is not the United States or Israel making another claim against Iran. This is Germany, a member in very good standing of the P5+1, a country who wholeheartedly negotiated the infamous nuke deal. The Germans, unlike the United States, are not known for their hyperbole. Germany doesn't exaggerate. Germans are very punctilious about language and about diplomacy. So if the German report is correct, and we have no reason to believe that it is not, this is without a doubt the worst possible scenario. The report clearly indicates that Iran's objective is to obtain nuclear technology not for energy or research purposes, but to be used for weaponry. Iran's game plan will be to provide that technology and those weapons to other countries and groups. Iran has always been irked by the fact that the United States controls who can and who cannot possess nuclear technology, and has called the United States arrogant for it. Now they are acquiring the ability to do the same. When sands shift in the Middle East, when issues are in flux, they are much easier to change and resolve than when they are rock solid and unchanged for generations. ISIS and Iran are now in a seesaw position. One monster is bowing its head, the other one again rearing its head. It's all an issue of momentum. ISIS is not dead and gone, only humbled. Iran is never humbled. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to discuss two columns today, one from the New York Times and one from the New York Post. First up is a column from the New York Times. It was published online October 6, 2017, and it is penned by Michael B. Oren. It is entitled, "The Iran Nuclear Deal Isn't Worth Saving." Michael Oren is currently Israel's Deputy Minister for Diplomacy. He was the Israeli ambassador to the United States from 2009 to 2013. A version of this op-ed appears in print on October 7th on page 823 of the New York edition with the headline, "The Iran Deal Isn't Worth Saving." A disclaimer. Michael and I used to play basketball Friday afternoons before Shabbat in Jerusalem every week. We lived in the same neighborhood. Also on the court with us, by the way, was Ron Dermer, the current ambassador to the United States. Oren thinks the Iran deal is not worthwhile, that it empowers Iran. He suggests that the entire deal was based on a myth. Here's how Oren begins. The only alternative to the Iran nuclear deal is war. That is what the Obama administration and proponents for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran claimed in 2015. Nobody in the Middle East believed that the United States would ever strike Iran, but enough Americans did that, and the deal went through. Oren continues to lay out the U.S. disconnect. This is how he writes. President Trump has long opposed the deal, calling it one of the worst and most one-sided transactions ever. On October 15th, the president faces a deadline to recertify or decertify the agreement. Various reports say he will opt for the latter. The deal's defenders, horrified by this prospect, are once again warning of catastrophe. Hard to see how abandoning the Iran deal doesn't lead to war, tweeted Samantha Power, a former ambassador to the United Nations. Oren explains that war was not the opposite of the deal. Considering how October 15th has come and gone, we see how correct Oren was. He writes, the alternative was never war, but a better deal. Rather than lifting sanctions on Iran, allowing it to retain its nuclear infrastructure and develop more advanced centrifuges, a better deal could have ramped up pressure on the Islamic Republic. This would have stripped Iran of capacities like uranium enrichment, which is unnecessary for civilian energy program, and linked any deal to changes in Iran's support for terrorism, its regional aggression, and its gross violation of human rights at home. Now Oren explains Israel's position of the nuke deal. He writes, Israel's position on the Iran deal was and remains clear. Fix it or nix it. Prime Minister Netanyahu recently told the United Nations, if canceled, the deal must be replaced by crippling sanctions that force Iran to dismantle its nuclear weapons capacity. Fixing the deal would include conducting stricter inspections of suspect Iran nuclear sites, imposing harsher penalties for Iranian violations, and, above all, eliminating the sunset clause. Now Oren concludes that it is important to the entire region to fix the nuke deal. Oren writes, either way, revisiting the agreement will send an unequivocal message to the world. It will say that Iran's state-funded terrorism and its attempts to establish a Shiite empire will not be tolerated. The weakness of the Iran deal invites wars. It will say, while displays of strength prevent it, it will say that the United States is truly unwilling to accept a nuclear Iran. Not now, not in a decade, not ever. Second up is a column from the New York Post. It was written by Carol Markovich. It's called "The Times' New Policy to Hide Reporters' Bias." It was published online on October 15th and in print the next day. The print edition title was much better, far superior. This is the print edition title: "The Gray Lady's Sad Bid to Conceal Her Bias." The Gray Lady is a nickname of the New York Times. It got the name from the newsprint, which rubbed off on people's hands, turning them gray. Markovitz is a columnist for the Post. Her niche is practical insight and matter-of-fact reality, clear thinking. This piece is exactly that mode. Here's how Markovich begins. The New York Times made it crystal clear in last year's presidential race that it would no longer hide its disdain of Donald Trump. But now it's suddenly troubled that readers might get the idea its reporters are biased. In a memo Friday, the paper laid out new social media guidelines for employees. Journalists are no longer allowed to express partisan opinions, promote political views, endorse candidates, and make offensive comments or do anything else that undercuts the Times' journalistic reputation. On its face, there is some good advice in these online rules for most people. But the Times' new edict appears meant specifically to protect its image as an objective source of news. However, the Times is not doing what they say they are doing. Markovich continues. Just last week, for example, James O'Keefe's Project Veritas released a video that caught Times audience strategy editor Nick Dudich on hidden camera talking openly about ways he manipulates news coverage and pushes his agenda. She explains that the readers of the Times really do not want impartiality. They want partisan confirmation of their own point of view. And Markovich is right. Here is how she concludes. The better change would be to have even more openness of opinion, not less. The 2016 election exposed the media's liberal bubble, and the best way to pop it would be to just acknowledge it. Until then, the new social media rules are just window dressing. Not appearing partisan and not actually being partisan are two different things. Until the New York Times cares about the latter more than the former, no change in the way their reporters use Twitter will make a difference. Markovitz is so clear thinking and so spot on. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. Let's discuss 3 cartoons today. This first cartoon is by Bob Gorel. It was published on October 18th, 2017. It has 4 frames. The Iranian Ayatollah is speaking. He says, Donald Trump refusing to certify our nuclear deal is an insult to the Iranian people. The second frame reads, we are a peaceful nation that merely wants to be left alone to pursue our benign interest. The third frame says the following, and in the interest of international harmony, let me add just one final thought. And here's the fourth frame, death to America. The next cartoon, or the next 2 cartoons, are by Yaakov Kirshen. They are dry bones from the Jerusalem Post. The first cartoon is called Israel and Kurdistan. It was published on October 17th. In the middle of the cartoon, there are 2 men fighting off their attackers with fencing foils. The caption reads, 2 new musketeers of the new Middle East. Israel battles the Iranian threat, and the Kurds face the Iraqi attack. The second cartoon is by Dry Bones, and it's called Balfour Declaration. On top of the cartoon reads, the wise old olive tree celebrates. The center of the cartoon is an old olive tree. The caption reads, the Balfour Declaration was written in November 1917. Now 100 years later, November 2017, the Jewish state in the land of Israel is alive and flourishing. At the bottom, the caption reads, happy birthday to us all. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Hamas has signed an agreement with the Palestinian Authority. The United States and Israel both clearly assert that Hamas must disarm and recognize Israel in this Palestinian unity agreement. Hamas says, in essence, no way. In an official statement, Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, said, No one in the universe can disarm us. On the contrary, we will continue to have the power to protect our citizens. Sinwar continued, no one has the ability to extract from us recognition of the occupation. Israel has put it simply, the Palestinians must choose peace or choose Hamas. Hamas has stated their intention equally clear. I would call this an impasse. Israel's Ministry of Agriculture recently said that they will feed the birds. They're going to feed the pelicans migrating from Europe to Africa. Israel will create a feeding zone for the great white pelican. The reasons are clear. If the Israelis do not feed these birds, the pelicans will destroy, pilfer entire agricultural regions and fisheries. These birds come in and descend and feed on whatever is available, especially fish. Israel is on the migration path of the pelican. Pelicans need food. Everyone is in favor of Israel providing the food. The environmentalists, the agriculturalists, the farmers, the economists, all support the idea. Birds feed when they're hungry, exactly in the places where they fed when they were migrating in the other direction. So hopefully this plan will work. Egypt was hit by another Islamic attack. A group of about a dozen Islamists attacked a church in the very center of El Arish. Rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs, were fired at the police and the church. 7 people were killed. This massive church in El Arish has already been closed for months. The government felt that because of the increased attacks against Christians in churches, it was important to close the church and station police outside. After the Islamists attacked the church, they robbed a bank and cleaned it out. They escaped in a pickup truck and the motorcycle heading south. The victims included 3 guards, 1 soldier, 3 civilians, and another 15 people who were injured in the bank itself. Another ISIS attack in Egypt was even more deadly. Actually, it was one of the worst attacks in the history of Egypt. 54 Egyptian security people were murdered in southwest section of Cairo. We do not know all the details. AP reported that in the course of 48 hours, 54 Egyptian police were killed. Officially, however, the Egyptian government announced that only 16 policemen were killed. Egyptian President al-Sisi said, quote, Egypt will continue its confrontation against terrorism and those financing and standing behind it with strength, decisiveness, and efficiency until it's curbed, unquote. Know this, al-Sisi will exact revenge. ISIS will soon be the target of Egyptian justice. The Syrian Foreign Ministry has made it clear that the presence of Turkish forces in northwestern Syria is an act of aggression. Turkey's response is that they are in Syria because of a deal they made with Russia and Iran in order to help the Syrian rebels fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda. The official Syrian ministry statement said, and this is important, Syria condemns in the strongest terms the incursion of units of the Turkish army in Idlib province, which constitutes a flagrant aggression against the sovereignty and security of the Syrian territory. The Syrian statement continued by responding to Turkey's obvious counterclaim to their claim. It read, the Turkish aggression is not tied in any way to the understandings that were reached between the guarantor states in Astana process, but constitute a violation of these understandings. UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Nikolai Mladenov, denounced statements made by leaders of Hamas calling for the destruction of Israel, and especially the word of the organization's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. I denounced the latest statements by some of Hamas's leaders calling for the destruction of Israel, Mladenov said. He added, under the auspices of Egypt, Palestinian leaders have undertaken an attempt to solve the grave humanitarian crisis in Gaza and allow Palestinian government to carry out its duties there. I encourage them to not be distracted from these goals. The Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs published an announcement also, but they rejected unconfirmed reports in the, quote, hostile media outlets, unquote, that a Saudi chief had recently visited Israel. The claims are baseless, the ministry statement said. The kingdom has always been transparent on its moves and contacts and has nothing to hide in that regard, a source within the ministry said. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We spoke about the sands and winds changing in the Middle East. It's a metaphor. Did you know that there are different expressions for heat wave and sandstorm in Hebrew? Some are borrowed from Arabic. We have, let's say, sufat chol. Another word is sharav. And finally, there's chamsin. Like in Inuit, the language of the Eskimos, there are many words for snow and cold winds. And in Russian, there are many words for vodka. In the Middle East, there are many words for heat wave and sandstorms. There are different terms depending on from where the wind is blowing, let's say, for instance, and the type of sand it brings in, or if it brings in sand at all. Sufat chol is a directly translated term for sandstorm. A sharav is a heat spell, with sand or without sand. And then there's the Arabic chamsin. A chamsin is a southern hot wind. The word actually means 50 in Arabic, because the hot wind and sand would blow for 50 days in a row from the south. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.